If you've ever been in the middle of editing a video and have had this lovely message pop up, or if you've ever faced a dreaded beach ball of death, or if you've noticed that your library has become enormous in size, this video is for you. Today I'll be answering these two questions. Why is my Final Cut library so big? And what can I do during and after the editing process to minimize its size? So let's get into it. So here, I was able to take this library of mine from 164 gigabytes to 40 gigabytes, and the remaining 40 gigabytes was just the size of my raw data. But before I get into how I did that, first I want to show you a mistake that I've made before. So here I have a Final Cut library, and as you can see, it's about 8 gigabytes in size, and on here I just have a single project that is complete. I've already exported the final project and saved it on an external drive, along with all of the original raw footage. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the project as well as all the clips that I've imported, and once this is done, you would think that the library file would be practically empty at this point, but if I go back and check the file size, here you can see that I only got rid of about 1 gigabyte of data, and that's definitely not the size of an empty library. So I wanted to show you this just to prove that simply deleting the projects and clips within Final Cut is not good enough. There are some additional steps you need to take to minimize its size and manage your disk space better. So the first step is store your library on an external drive. I use this 2TB Seagate hard drive, and this will give you a little bit more room to edit freely without your disk space constantly getting full. I also keep a specific folder for all my libraries since I prefer to have one library per project. I find this easier to manage, especially because I'm usually working on more than one project over a period of time. So here are some different videos that I'm working on, and this top file right here that says empty FCP is basically a blank library. So every time I want to begin a new project, I just copy this library and go from there, and that way once I'm also done working on a project, I can just discard the entire file and then move on to the next project. Now here's my library that's 164 gigabytes, and I want to show you which files within the library take up the most space. To open it up, you just need to right click and hit show package contents, and you should see something that looks like this. Any events that you have will be listed here, so I just have the one that's called Fall Look. And if you open the drop down to your event, there are only two files that significantly contribute to your library size, and they are original media and render files. So original media is any of the clips, pictures, basically any of the content that you've imported into Final Cut to use in your videos. So as you can see here, mine is slightly over 40 gigabytes, which happens. Raw footage files can be pretty large, but I already have a dedicated file outside of Final Cut for my raw footage. So basically everything within the original media file currently is a duplicate taking up unnecessary space. So that leads us to step 2. Select Leave Files in Place when importing your media. When you're importing your footage into Final Cut, it gives you two options. Either you can copy the files to your library or leave files in place. When you select Copy to Library, Final Cut duplicates the imported media. This is useful because you do have a backup of your data, but it takes up a lot of room. So what I usually do is copy to library when importing my media, and once I've completed a project, I make sure I clear out the original media file. But if you don't have the additional space to keep these duplicate files whilst working on a project, you can just select Leave Files in Place. What Final Cut will do instead is create an alias, which links back to the content's original location, so it doesn't take up any additional room, saving you a ton of space before you've even started editing. Next, let's talk about render files. Render files usually take up the most space and makes the Final Cut library massive. So these files are usually created automatically by Final Cut as you make any changes to your project. You may have noticed these white dots as you're editing. If you see this, it means that that portion of your footage still needs to be rendered. So as you're cutting clips, layering them, creating transitions, and so on, Final Cut renders the footage so that it has an easier time reading the footage and playing it back smoothly. But as you can imagine, with all the changes you make, the file size can get a little bit out of hand. So that leads us to step 3. Delete render files. Another important thing to note about render files is that Final Cut doesn't automatically delete unused render files as it creates new ones. If you're midway through editing a project and realize you're running out of disk space, just go to File and select Delete Generated Event Files. Here, check off Delete Render Files, and then specify that you want to delete unused render files only. This way, Final Cut will remove any files that you no longer need, and that way you won't have any issues with playback. For me, this helped me free up about 60 gigabytes of space. And I just want to be really clear that deleting render files does not harm your footage or your project, and your project can always be re-rendered at a later time as long as you keep it within the Final Cut library. You can also choose to delete all render files if you'd like to free up even more space, but keep in mind this will cause issues with playback and you'll probably have this message pop up until you go back and have it rendered again. So I only do this once I've completed a project and have already exported the final file. You can also delete all render files directly through Finder, which I find to be a little bit quicker. So just close Final Cut and go straight into the render files folder, and you can actually move all of these 3 files into the trash. But remember to do this only if you're done with the project and you've already exported it, or if you're okay with re-rendering the footage later on when you're ready to work on the project again. The next step that I recommend is step 4, and that is to turn off background render. As I mentioned earlier, render files are created automatically by Final Cut. If you want to avoid this, you can change your settings by going into the Preferences tab and deselecting background rendering. Again, this may cause issues with playback for certain parts of your video, but you can choose what parts you'd like to render manually by simply selecting the portion of the video you would like to render, then go to the menu bar and hit Modify and select Render Selection. That way, Final Cut will be rendering a smaller portion of the footage, thus taking up less disk space. So since I've completed this project and exported the final copy onto my hard drive, I've gone ahead and deleted all render files, and that has brought my library down from a size of 164.29 gigabytes to 40.51 gigabytes. So I've saved myself about 123 gigabytes of space, and again, what is left of that is just pretty much just the size of my raw data. I also just want to be clear that deleting render files won't harm your footage or your project. Here you can see I don't have any missing clips or data, just a whole lot of white dots. And if for whatever reason I want to store my library like this, I can, and always return to edit this project later on. So as I had mentioned earlier, I no longer need to come back to this project. It's complete. I've exported the final file and saved my raw footage on my external drive outside of Final Cut. So I'm just going to go back into the library's package contents and into the original media folder and just move everything to the trash. Now, since I didn't hit leave files in place when I initially imported my clips, when I go back into Final Cut, it will now show that the files are missing. So I'm just gonna get rid of these on Final Cut as well and just move everything to the trash. And with this, your Final Cut library should be completely empty, almost as if you've never used it before, so you don't have to worry about any data hanging around from your previous projects. And also one more step that I want to mention, it might be an obvious one, but anyways, step 5 is to empty your trash. I just wanted to throw it in there just because it does help clear out some disk space, especially after you've deleted a bunch of items. But that is all for this video. I really hope it was helpful for you. If it was, please make sure you give it a like. It really helps me out as a small creator. And if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down below. And of course, please subscribe if you like videos like this. I do plan on doing more videos on Final Cut and iMovie in the future. So please stick around if that's something that you enjoy. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.